The village was small, quiet, and old. It sat between green hills and dry fields, far from any city. People lived simple lives there, growing crops, raising goats, and telling stories by firelight. But behind every smile, there was fear. That fear had one name: Bloody River. The river ran just outside the village. In summer, it looked calm, even beautiful. But the people knew the truth. Every spring, like clockwork, someone died in it. Always one person. Always pulled in during the same cursed week. It didn't matter if they were young or old. Careful or strong, the river chose its victim, and no one escaped. The water turned red each time, like it carried blood from an old wound. That's how it got its name. People said it was cursed. Some believed it was angry. Others said a woman long ago had died there in pain, and her spirit still waited for justice. No one dared go near it during the cursed week. Mothers kept their children inside. Men avoided the banks, even with work to do. It had been this way for as long as anyone could remember, and no one had ever been saved. That year, the people prayed the river would stay quiet. But deep in the hills, the wind carried a strange feeling. Something was about to change. The bloody river would rise again, but this time, it would not take without a fight. This time, history would not repeat. And it all began with a girl named Stephanie. Stephanie was new to the village. She had come to visit her Aunt Layla, who lived in a small house near the edge of the fields. Stephanie was full of life. She loved nature, long walks, and quiet places. The village felt peaceful to her, like a place from an old storybook. She didn't know the truth behind that peace. No one had told her about the bloody river. Aunt Layla wanted to, but she thought it could wait. Stephanie had only been there for 2 days. "I'll tell her tomorrow," she had said, but tomorrow came too late. That morning, the sky was gray and the wind was soft. Stephanie wore a light sweater and boots and walked into the woods with her sketchbook. She liked to draw trees and birds. She followed a narrow path she had found behind the house. It twisted between tall grass and wildflowers. She heard the sound of water and smiled. She didn't know she was walking straight toward the cursed river. When she reached the riverbank, she paused. The water looked strange, dark, thick, like it was holding a secret. Stephanie stepped closer, trying to find a good spot to sit. The ground near the edge was soft and muddy from the spring rains. And then, suddenly, the earth gave way. With a loud crack, the dirt under her feet collapsed. Stephanie screamed as her body fell into the cold, pulling water. The bloody river had chosen again, and it had found her. Eli Morgan lived far from the village, out near the hills where the land was wide and open. His ranch was quiet, just horses, a few cows, and the sound of wind through the grass. People in the village didn't know much about him. They only knew he kept to himself, spoke little, and always wore a hat that shadowed his eyes. But Eli had a past. Years ago, he had been a soldier. He had seen war, loss, and fire. He had lost his younger brother in battle, and after that, he walked away from everything. He came back to the land where he grew up, hoping to find peace in the silence. Every day, he worked with his hands. Fences, saddles, feeding animals. No visitors, no noise. Just the land and his thoughts. That morning, Eli was out early. One of his calves had wandered off. He followed its tracks down toward the edge of the woods. As he rode his horse through the tall grass, he heard something strange scream. A sharp, frightened scream that cut through the wind. He stopped. It came again. Then a splash. Without thinking, Eli turned his horse toward the sound. His heart beat fast. He pushed through the trees, and there it was, the river. The dark, cursed, bloody river. And in the middle of it, a girl was fighting for her life. her hands reaching, her head going under. Eli didn't hesitate. He jumped from his horse and ran straight toward the water. Eli ran fast, his boots sliding in the mud. The river roared louder now, wild and angry. Stephanie was in the middle, her arms splashing weakly, her face sinking under the water again and again. The current was strong, pulling her deeper every second. Without stopping, Eli threw off his coat and dove into the freezing water. The cold hit him like a punch. It stole his breath. The river grabbed at him, pulling him left, dragging him down, but he fought it. He kicked hard, pushing toward the girl. Her head dipped under once more. For a moment, he couldn't see her. Then he spotted her hand. He reached out, grabbed her wrist, and pulled with all his strength. Stephanie's body was limp now. Her eyes were closed. Eli wrapped his arm around her and turned back toward the shore. The river didn't want to let them go. It pulled at his legs, slammed his body against rocks, tried to twist him away from her. But Eli held on. He pushed through the water, inch by inch. His muscles burned. His lungs felt tight. But he didn't stop. At last, he reached the edge and dragged her onto the muddy ground. Stephanie wasn't moving. Eli dropped beside her and began pressing her chest, over and over. "Breathe," he said. "Come on, breathe." He tilted her head back and gave her air. Seconds passed. Then she coughed. Water came from her mouth. Her chest rose. Stephanie was alive. The bloody river had lost. Stephanie lay on the ground, shivering. Her clothes were soaked. Her lips were blue, but she was breathing. Eli took off his shirt and wrapped it around her. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the cold and the weight of what had just happened. He had never pulled anyone from death before. She opened her eyes slowly, confused and weak. "What happened?" she whispered. "You fell into the river," Eli said gently. "I got you out," Stephanie blinked. A tear rolled down her cheek. She tried to speak again, but her lips trembled too much. Eli picked her up in his arms. "We have to get you warm," he said. He placed her gently on his horse, climbed up behind her, and held her tight so she wouldn't fall. The ride back to the village was quiet, except for the sound of hooves and the soft wind. When they reached the village, people came running. They stared in shock. Some crossed themselves. Others whispered in fear and wonder. "She's alive?" "No one survives the bloody river." Eli didn't answer. He carried Stephanie to the healer's home and laid her on a soft bed by the fire. Aunt Layla ran in, crying with joy. "She's safe now," Eli said, stepping back, but deep inside, he felt something heavy. Not fear, not sadness, but a strange feeling he hadn't felt in years. Hope. For the first time, the bloody river had failed, and Eli Morgan had made it happen. The village had never seen anything like this. Every year, the bloody river took one person, and no one ever returned. But now, Stephanie was alive. People whispered in the streets. They gathered near the healer's house, trying to understand what had happened. Inside, Stephanie lay near the fire, covered in blankets. Her face was pale, but she was safe. Aunt Layla sat by her side, holding her hand and thanking God again and again. Eli stood near the door, quiet. He didn't like attention. But now all eyes were on him. Children peeked through the windows. Old men stared at him like he was some kind of hero. Women offered him warm food and tea, but he gently said no. He wasn't used to praise. He just did what he had to do. The village elder, Baba Farouk, came and sat with Eli for a while. "No one has ever survived," he said softly. "You didn't just save a girl. You challenged something dark." Eli said nothing. He only looked at the floor. That night, the village stayed awake. Some lit candles. Others prayed. A few brave souls walked to the riverbank and stared at the water, waiting for it to rise in anger. But the river stayed quiet. It was the first time in years that the cursed week passed without death. The people didn't know what it meant. But deep down, they felt something had shifted, and it had started with one rancher and one girl who was not supposed to survive. 2 days after the rescue, an old man named Rafik knocked on Eli's ranch door. His beard was long, his back bent, but his eyes were sharp. Eli opened the door and nodded, letting him in. Rafik sat slowly on a wooden chair. He looked at Eli for a long time before speaking. "I saw you pull that girl from the river," he said. "You don't know what you've done." Eli didn't speak. He just listened. "The curse is old," Rafik continued. "Long ago, a young woman lived here. She was kind, full of life, just like Stephanie. But soldiers came one spring. They hurt her and threw her into the river. No one helped her. The village stayed silent, too afraid. Since that day, the river has taken one life every year, always a woman, always during this week." Eli's hands tightened into fists. "No one ever fought the river," Rafik said. "Until you." Eli looked out the window toward the hills. "It wasn't about the curse," he said quietly. "She was drowning. I couldn't let her die." Rafik nodded. "And that is why the river failed. You showed it something it hadn't seen in years. Courage." The old man stood up. "You've started something, Eli. The village feels it. The curse may finally be breaking." Eli watched him walk away, feeling the weight of the story settle deep in his chest. He had saved a day. Life, but now, maybe he had also touched a soul lost long ago. Days passed, and Stephanie grew stronger. Her color returned, and her smile came back slowly. She didn't remember much from the river, just cold, darkness, and then strong arms pulling her up. But she knew who saved her. Every afternoon she walked up the hill to visit Eli's ranch. She brought him bread, fruit, and sometimes her drawings. He didn't speak much at first, just nodded and offered her tea. But slowly he began to talk. He told her about the war, about his brother who never came home, about the silence that followed him everywhere. Stephanie listened quietly. She didn't ask too many questions. She just sat near, sometimes helping him feed the animals or brush the horses. One morning, she brought him a sketch she made. It was a picture of the river, but calm, peaceful, with the sun shining on it. "I drew it how I want to remember it," she said. Eli looked at the drawing for a long time. Then he smiled, just a little. "It's beautiful," he said. That was the first time Stephanie saw his eyes truly soften. Eli had spent years hiding from pain. But now something was changing. This girl, once just a stranger, had brought light into his quiet, broken world. The ranch no longer felt lonely. Her laughter filled the air. Her presence brought peace. And Eli began to believe that maybe the river hadn't just spared Stephanie. Maybe it had given him a second chance, too. Spring came again. The trees turned green, flowers bloomed, and the air smelled fresh. But in the village, people waited in silence. This was the time the bloody river always took someone. Mothers held their children close. Old men watched the sky. Everyone remembered the past, but this year felt different. Stephanie walked freely through the village, her steps light. She wore a red scarf around her neck, a gift from Eli. Every morning, she visited the healer's garden. Every evening, she walked with Eli near the edge of the hills. People watched her, amazed. She had faced death and lived. The river stayed calm. No strange winds. No thick, red water. It flowed gently, like any other river. On the last day of the cursed week, the villagers gathered near the banks. Baba Farouk spoke first. For the first time in many years, he said, no one was lost. The river did not take. It gave. Stephanie stepped forward. She held a red ribbon in her hand. She tied it to a small tree that stood near the place she had fallen. The tree was young, but strong. It had grown from the ground where Eli had pulled her out. This is for her, Stephanie said softly. Woman the river took long ago, and for all the others. The wind blew gently. People stood in silence, then slowly began to smile. The curse was broken, and the village, once afraid of the river, now saw it with new eyes, because one rancher had dared to fight back. Years passed, but the story of that spring was never forgotten. People still talked about the girl who was saved, and the quiet rancher who jumped into the cursed river without fear. Eli Morgan and Stephanie didn't leave the village. They stayed. Over time, they grew closer to hearts, joined by something deeper than words. They planted more trees by the river. They built a small bench near the one that saved her life. And one sunny morning, under the tree with the red ribbon, they got married. The whole village came to see. Flowers hung from every door. Children laughed. Even the river flowed gently, like it was watching with a smile. Eli built a new part of his ranch for rescued horses and injured animals. Stephanie taught village children how to draw and paint. She smiled more now, her laughter soft and bright. People said she brought color back to the hills. No one ever drowned in the river again. Some believed the curse had ended because of courage. Others believed it ended because of love. Maybe it was both. The small village, once filled with fear, had changed. It became a place of peace, of healing, and of hope. And every spring, people tied red ribbons to the trees near the river to remember the lives lost and to honor the man who changed everything. Eli never called himself a hero, but to the village and to the girl he saved, he would always be more than a rancher. He was the man who made the river silent.